Ben Burroughs is director of the Horry County Archives Center, established at Coastal Carolina University by the Horry County Higher Education Commission in 2006. The center focuses on researching the history of Horry County and surrounding counties, including the history of Coastal Carolina University. The center works with local history-minded groups to find significant historical material, preserve it, and make it accessible to the public via digitization. That is his current career and job title. For those of you who don't know Ben, he has spent a literal lifetime, I would dare say since probably middle school, a fascination with local history. I'm very much the same. I grew up with the same thing. So I came up watching Ben do the same things I was doing with the same interest. Of course, I was in Plantersville. That's where my fascination was, my home there. So it was a very easy jump for me to come to Horry County and have him as a mentor to learn so much about this. So it is a wonderful thing that we have a partnership with him and that he has always done so much here. He has also been the key leader. There have been presidents, there have been chairmen, there have been other figures in the Horry County Historical Society, but I dare say that if you say Horry County Historical Society in Horry County, the immediate thought is Ben. So Ben has been the backbone as far as our perspective has been here in Horry County, as being the key figure that helped us figure out what the past, present, and maybe some of the future will be in Horry County. Just recently, some of you may have had an opportunity to celebrate the 200th anniversary of the Robert Mills Courthouse right down the street here, which is now currently City Hall. So at that event, Ben had a handful of notes, and it was hot, and we were miserable and standing on the street with a lot of street noise, and we had to pull him down and calm him down and say, you got too much to say, come back to the museum. So for those of you who didn't get to witness that, this is the no holds barred presentation where we can sit in the air condition with great audio, great pictures here, and be able to enjoy a little more than what we were able to give you, or Ben was able to give you on that day. So thank you for coming. I think you're in store for a really great presentation about a fantastic piece of our history that is just marked South Carolina specials here with the architecture of Conway. So with that, I'll turn you over to Ben.
Thank you, Walter, for that introduction. Like you said, we were at the City Hall event, and we just realized there was so much that could be said about that building. And so we decided to do this for people who are interested in the architecture of the most significant historical building in Horry County, without a doubt. Without a doubt. And so hopefully you'll understand why I'm saying that as we talk more about the building. Let me get my equipment here so we can. This is a picture that I took about 20 years after a restoration of the City Hall. And I thought, okay, this is in really good shape. I want to record how it looks at that time. And I took about 100 pictures of the building, you know. And I'm glad I did, because since then some things have changed. But this is from 20 years ago, how it looked. Okay. This is a photograph of Robert Mills, who was born in Charleston, South Carolina in 1781 and died in 1855. How many of y'all have heard of Robert Mills? Okay, some, but not everybody. Let me read a little bit about him and about his architectural work, and it'll give you an overview before we start looking at all these pictures. First of all, like I said, he was born in Charleston, South Carolina. He's considered to be the first native-born trained architect in the United States. Okay, on April 12, 1824, the following entry is recorded in the Journal of the Horry District Board of Commissioners and that volume covers 1802 to 1855. And it says, the subscriber will contract to erect a courthouse in Horry District according to the plans and drawings exhibited, finding all materials for the sum of $9,500. This bid to construct the building was signed in Georgetown by Russell Warren. Now, at that time, there was a courthouse in Conway, the first courthouse. This is the second courthouse. The first courthouse stood on a lot on what is now Fifth Avenue between Laurel Street and Elm Street and facing the downtown. If you're familiar with the landscape, that's a hill up there. So it's at the crest of the hill. I used to live in a little apartment up right beside that spot, and I absolutely love that location. And in the summertime, there was a constant breeze. It was like an ocean breeze coming in, because that's the first big hill that you get to from the ocean. And I imagine that's why they chose that site, because of that superior location on that hill, overlooking the village below and then the river. So that courthouse, and that's not the one we're here to talk about much, but I think you need to know that background. It was a wooden courthouse. We don't have a drawing of it, but we have the specifications from it. I meant to bring, and I walked out of my house and forgot it, a book that I have. It's not mine. I'm just the caretaker of it right now. It's been passed from generation to generation to generation of people like me to protect it. And it is the first volume of the records for Horry County from 1801 to about 1830s or 1820s, I guess. And in that volume are the specifications for this second courthouse that we're going to be talking about. And it's fascinating to read it, because you're reading from that original document, and it's got all kind of architectural details, which is what I really love to see on these old buildings. And it explains what is supposed to be built and how it's to be done and who's doing it and the problems they're having and stuff like that. And I'm sorry I forgot it, but it's apparently the court people had decided that the records in the first courthouse were not being maintained properly. And so they ordered that all the ones that still existed to be transcribed into a book provided by Mr. I think it was John Durant. And that would be the beginning of trying to get it straight with the records of this county. And that's the book I've got. So the courthouse that this document is referring to, talking about the ones that I read about, was to be the second for Horry County. It still stands today and is the most architecturally significant building in Horry County, for it was designed by Robert Mills. Mills is regarded by many as the first professionally trained architect born in America. He was born in Charleston in 1781. Mills studied architecture in part under the guidance of Thomas Jefferson at Monticello. The Horry District Courthouse, built in 1824-25, which is the one we're going to be talking about, exhibits Jefferson's influence on Mills. It is also the best preserved of all the courthouses that Mills designed in South Carolina. Once Mills became well known as an architect, the state of South Carolina hired him to be the, I think it was like the commissioner of public buildings for the state. I'm not exactly sure what the title was, but one of his jobs was to design all courthouses in the state. And so he was the one that was put in charge of doing this one for Horry County, thank goodness. And as that I just read you said, the one we have is the best preserved. Now, he did a bunch of them in the county, but so many of them have been altered so much that you have to look at it and somebody kind of has to tell you what's been changed. I didn't realize the one we had was so pristine until I was giving a tour for this group of architects, and one of them was the head of a committee on there that was working on Robert Mills architecture in South Carolina, and she just went crazy. And she said, this is, I'm very familiar with all the Robert Mills courthouses in this state, and this is the best preserved one of any of them, at least on the outside, and really on the inside too at that time. So we are very fortunate to have one designed by Robert Mills, and even more fortunate to have one that is well preserved. While Robert Mills designed many famous public and private buildings, including the nation's first Washington Monument in Baltimore, which was built in 1815 and 1825, he is most known for winning in 1836 the privately organized competition for the design of the Washington Monument in Washington. His proposal for the monument was for a 600-foot-high square shaft, barely tapered and almost flat-topped, rising from a huge Greco-Roman peristyle, which is a circular colonnade, wreathed with 32 Doric columns plus a porch. That winning design was later altered after the death of Mills and the interruption of the erection of the monument during and after the Civil War. So what we have in Washington now, when you see the Washington Monument, is what was finally built of Mills' design, and I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. But he gets the credit for winning the competition for that first monument to President George Washington. On May 4th, 1824, the Commissioners of Public Buildings for Horry District awarded the contract to build the new Horry District Courthouse to Major Russell Warren. On May 20th, 1824, a detailed contract for the courthouse was agreed to between Warren and the following commissioners: John Sarvis, A.W. McRae, Samuel Wilson, Benjamin Galls Jr., and William Johnston. And if any of y'all have deep roots in Horry County, you're probably kin to one of those people. The contract called for Russell Warren to, quote, build the courthouse now to be built for the District of Georgetown, for the District of Horry, finding all the materials of the best quality and doing the work in a workmanlike manner according to the plan and specifications thereof, forming a part of this contract, and to finish and complete the same on or before the 15th day of May in the year of our Lord 1825. The balance due of the contract for the construction of the courthouse was paid to Russell Warren on April 18th, 1825. So he was within the time limit. The second Horry District Courthouse still stands today. In 1908, it was purchased by the city of Conway for use as a city hall. In recent years, it has been carefully restored. It is an excellent example of the South Carolina courthouses designed by Robert Mills while he served as superintendent of public buildings for South Carolina. The Robert Mills designed jail was eventually incorporated into part of the Grace Hotel in 1914. Now you might be saying, what was the jail? As soon as they finished construction of the courthouse, they immediately started on construction of a jailhouse designed by Robert Mills also. And it was built in the one lot over. And for any of you who were living in Conway up until the probably about 1978 or 79, somewhere in there, you probably remember seeing it sitting there. However, it had been added to and basically new construction wrapped around it, and it became the Grace Hotel of all things for years. And there was a plan in the 1970s to tear down, because the new construction that had been the Grace Hotel, and go back to that core building, which was the Robert Mills designed jailhouse. And that's what I remember seeing. Well, I remember the Grace Hotel too, but for the long time, what was left of the old jailhouse stood there, and plans were at that time to turn it into the museum for Horry County. But the people that were working on getting that done could never actually get it going. You know, the 1960s and 70s was still a time when they were tearing down historical buildings, not preserving them. And one night, the hated midnight bulldozers came. It actually wasn't at night, but it was when the chair of the committee member was out of town, and they bulldozed it down. And that was a sad day because, again, like the courthouse, it was designed by Robert Mills. And after they tore down the Grace Hotel part, it was pretty much still intact. And I'll tell you more about that in a minute. So those are some reasons why the building was so important. Now, Robert Mills is famous also for the Robert Mills Atlas. That's why I put that on here. Most people, when you think of Robert Mills, you think of the South Carolina Atlas that he did in 1825. And historians use those maps. He had maps of every county in the state, all documented. And this was the one for Horry County. Some of the other buildings that Mills had designed on the national scale would have been the U.S. Patent Office in Washington, D.C., which is up here on the top left. The old post office in Washington, D.C., which I think is a hotel now. I believe it is. And the U.S. Treasury building on the far right, and here's a modern-day picture of the U.S. Treasury. It still looks like it did. Over here on the left, at the bottom, is the Washington Monument in Baltimore, which he also designed, and it looks like that. And I threw this one in the bottom in the middle. This is a house in Columbia, South Carolina, designed by Robert Mills. And if you look at it, you see a lot of similarities with our courthouse. Here's the original design of the Washington Monument that Mills designed for Washington, D.C. To this day, I still wish they would raise the money and complete his original design, but that won't happen. But it was, a much more elaborate thing here, but it had that obelisk in the middle going up, and it had actually, the Egyptians would have engravings on the shaft, and it had those for President Washington going up. And the top was a little bit flatter. You know, the one today is like a point, and that one was kind of flat. But anyway, that is the design that was awarded the winning place. But when Mills died, there was no one that kept pushing it to be done correctly. And then the Civil War broke out, and it just stopped construction completely. And then when they finally got back going with it again later on, by that time, you know, the nation had been through so much, and I guess the money was lacking. They just ended up doing the shaft in the middle and changed it somewhat. And there it goes today. The one there, he was proposing one for 600 feet. I think the one today is 555 feet, 5 1/8 inch. Now that's being precise. Robert Mills's grave is located in the Congressional Cemetery in Washington, D.C. That's a picture of it right there in the middle. And you can't read that probably in here too good, but it gives his birth and death years. First federal architect whose influence molded our architecture and whose genius gave us the Washington Monument. Now, because of all that with Mills, you know, that makes this building that we have important, that architect did that. And so years ago, the city decided to make the little part to the side of the courthouse the Robert Mills Park to honor him. And y'all probably have been in there and seen that, but there it goes there. That's the official name is the Robert Mills Park. And it's this, of course, this picture was taken 20 years ago. And it was really beautiful and it shows the old fountain, which I'll talk more about in a minute. Okay, so the Horry County Courthouse. First of all, as I said, there was a courthouse built well, first of all, the town was formed as Kingston in 1732. And then in 1801, it built its first courthouse, where I told you, over on Fifth Avenue. At that time, the name of the town was changed to Conway Borough. In 1855, Conway was actually incorporated. Now, that's a fact that we had forgotten, believe it or not, up until a few years ago, when we found it by mistake searching old records. And it explained so many things that people had wondered about previously. But it was actually incorporated in 1855, and the name had shortened to Conway Borough, B-O-R-O. And in 1898, the name Conway, the borough was dropped and it went to Conway. And that was when it was incorporated for the second time. So what happened was, in 1855, when it was incorporated and they elected a mayor and city council, it was running well. The war came, it disrupted everything. The leaders died. After the war, nobody even wanted to bother with any more government, so they didn't incorporate it. And it wasn't until 1898 that they finally decided they needed to reincorporate it, which was totally lost to history. I mean, it just amazes me that that happened like that. But we got the documents that show that and prove it. So, this is a map of the town, and I'm going to show you, just so you'll know. We're kind of diving into the details here, but this is Main Street right there. And that first courthouse stood, if I don't know whether y'all can see that light, but it was about right there. And then the one that we have now was, let me find it, I think right there. I think that's it there. They came down off that hill and they came down into the village. And I call it a village because that's really what it was. You know, to call it a city is to exaggerate. It was more like, even a town might be an exaggeration. It was like a little village. Here we go. That's it. Lot 31 is where the courthouse that's now the Conway City Hall sits today, right there, Main and 3rd Avenue. Here's a list of, and we're getting away from the building, but again, because it became the City Hall, this is important. These are all the mayors of Conway from 1855 to 2025. And you see there were two originally under the first incorporation. Captain Samuel Pope, who was a sea captain actually, and Joseph J. Richwood. And then it had that break, and then it was reincorporated, and the first mayor of the current incorporation was Cephas Perry Quattlebaum. Okay, we mentioned Thomas Jefferson a minute ago and how he influenced it. I think this is really neat that he influenced Mills like this. Mills spent some of his time studying architecture under Thomas Jefferson. He was taken under Jefferson's wing and actually was invited to study at Jefferson's home, Monticello. Jefferson's influence can be seen in some of Mills' works, specifically the courthouse built in Conway Borough, South Carolina for Horry County, which was completed in 1825. And that's something that we can be very proud about. Most people would have no idea unless it was pointed out to them. You might say, well, what was it? Well, one of the main things was that it wasn't stuccoed over. So many of Robert Mills' buildings were brick and then they were stuccoed over. Jefferson didn't do that. Jefferson left the bricks exposed. You can see at Monticello how it was. And when Mills was designing a lot of these other courthouses, at least the ones that we have pictures of and stuff, so many of them were stuccoed over, and ours left like this. Also, these arches underneath, these were closed. This was a vault corridor that went through, and well, I thought we could see one on that building. Yeah, I don't see one on that building on its home, but you see it on the others of Thomas Jefferson. That picture right there, by the way, is about the oldest photograph that we have. It's not in good you can tell, it looks like it needs painting, the white stuff, which that part was at the bottom there, stucco, but all the rest was brick. The columns are stuccoed. But this was after Civil War, after Reconstruction, and in the Depression, when they just didn't have the money to keep up these public buildings like we do today. And you can see here with this building in Columbia, this house, you see the arches, just like the courthouse in Conway. The main difference on this one is the stairs go up the center rather than either side of the porch. The building is so symmetrical, symmetry in it, and it looks like something almost out of Greece or Rome, just a smaller version of it. These classical details. This picture, this part right here, this alcove to the left, right here. Some people have asked, well, was it supposed to be a statue in there, or did that used to be a window? No, that was just a decoration. It's an ancient decoration that he put in there for balance. It wasn't practical to put a window at that spot. Actually, there's a stairwell right in that area. So he put these in there for balance of the building. You can see also on this side, this is a typical Jefferson thing. The wall indents right here, and then this big window is in that indentation there. And then it comes over here and it actually jumps back out. You can't see it. But that was another thing that he picked up, I think, from Jefferson. There you can see it better on this side. Now, that is a picture from, like I say, about 20 years ago. And this is an older one. You can see how it hadn't changed, really. That one was probably from the 1920s or so. Right there. That's from the 2010 or so. Now, see that building behind the courthouse? Way back there? That was where the first fire department was. I'll show you a picture of that. There. This is the first fire station, fire truck and everything. And it's a shame that the city didn't hold on to that fire truck. But they do, I think, have the second one, but they don't have that really, really old one. That's really neat. And at the back of the building today, that two-story office addition is where that old fire station used to be. Just so you'll know. Okay, as we said, when they built the courthouse, as soon as it was finished in 1825, he turned to the jailhouse. And yes, that's how they would spell jailhouse in the plans for the building. And that's it. And that's it. Before the Grace Hotel was built around it. And if you notice, he's incorporating these same, the window within this indentation, the door within the indentation. what was interesting about this building, because we've read newspaper accounts of it, it was considered really modern at its time. This is 1825. And one of the things that they pointed out to talk about how modern it was is it had an indoors hanging room. So when somebody was tried and convicted and the death penalty was the verdict, hangings could take place inside. And I think, oh, wow, it's interesting because later on it got to the point where the public opinion was that the death penalty should be viewed by the community as a deterrent to horrible crimes. And so they quit using the hanging room and started erecting scaffolding in a public area so that the men of the community who were encouraged to go would be there to witness justice being carried out and that the verdict was carried out. There is a newspaper report we've got for when they were still doing hangings in the old jailhouse. It talked about the crowd of men that were out in the front, there just to kind of support the court system and justice and everything. But the tradition was after the hanging took place, they brought the person who had been hung out into the courtyard to show that the jury's verdict had been carried out, and they would put the body actually on display to say, okay, it was taken care of, it was done. So it's all interesting. I think it was just a different time. Now, some of you might think, oh, the hanging, that's horrible, that's so primitive. I just remind you that I think England still did hangings as their primary death penalty up until after World War II sometimes. So there might be places that still do it today. I don't know. But as we became more modernized, they started doing the electric chair and the other ways to do it that were considered a little more humane. There's a wider view of the picture, and the reason I included this is, and I think this is why the picture was taken. You can see, at least on my computer, you can see this ridge of dirt. What's happening here is they have dug a trench from along the main street, and they laid pipes out here. They were getting ready to put in a water system or either sewer system, I'm not sure. And so that's what the picture was probably really taken for. It just happened to have the old jailhouse in the background, thank goodness. But this is not how it would have normally looked. This has been dug up, and these are the pipes that are getting ready to be put in place. That picture was accidentally found in the records in the courthouse, in the city records. And there's the Grace Hotel that was built around the old jail in 1914. So the old jail was this part way back here, back up in here, right in that section in there. And that is when they tore down what was the Grace Hotel, and that's what was still left of the old jailhouse. And I remember that. There was that sign you see right there. It said, "Pardon my looks. I'm 250 years old," or whatever it was, and plans are to turn me into the Horry County Museum or something like that. And it sat there for like 5 or 6 years, and then the powers that be in the city government decided they weren't going to wait any longer. They needed a parking lot. So they tore it down for a parking lot. Hanging room and all. Here's a picture coming down off of the Main Street Bridge. And you can see the Grace Hotel on the left, that tall building right there. But it also shows this house, this big house right here on the left, which was right beside the Grace Hotel and the jail. And then the next one down would have been the City Hall. This was where the first mayor lived, and his name, he was a sea captain, Captain Samuel Pope, and that house was built about 1848, sometime in 1840s. It had 4 big columns across the front. It's a big house. It went back real far, 2.5 stories, and a little small porch on the second level so he could stand out. And at that point, the reason I think he was located there, he had a shipyard which was across from the house and just a little ways down the Waccamaw River. So he could come out in that little balcony and look down towards the shipyard and at least see the boats coming and going in there. But that house was also torn down by the city for that water department we have down there on the 2nd Avenue. We didn't do real good saving our buildings back then. And I understand there were things in that attic. I talked to somebody, a city employee, that they said, Ben, they called us up there and said, anything up there y'all want, y'all can get. And he got all these handmade jugs, you know, and that people pay bunches of money for now. No telling what was thrown away. And that's a close-up of the house with the Grace Hotel behind it. But the bridge came down right smack dab in his front yard. Well, no, what had been his front yard. The bridge was not there when he was alive. He died in 1864, and the bridge wasn't built until 1938. And there's another picture. It always had vines on those columns. I always wanted to cut them down because I liked the columns, but you couldn't see the columns because the vines were always on it. And these are just some pictures of the courthouse. Here's the courthouse interior. This was after that restoration 20 years ago. And they set it back up as a courtroom. And you can see they had the tables in there for the attorneys, the prosecuting and the defense and everything, and the clerk's desk, the judge's seat, and everything. Okay. One thing before, I'll go ahead and show you the next picture. The Great Charleston Earthquake of 1886. Have y'all ever seen these on the courthouse? Those are earthquake rods. Do you know the story behind them and why they're there and everything? Okay, in 1886, there was a massive earthquake in Charleston, and the effects of it were felt in Conway and probably a little bit further. But the story is that most of the buildings in Conway in 1886 were wooden buildings, but foundations were made out of bricks and chimneys were out of bricks. And then you had buildings like this that were made out of bricks. Well, the wooden buildings could kind of sway and give, but the bricks were firm, and so it was shaking so much, the concrete that holding the bricks together broke, and all the chimneys toppled. It said pretty much there wasn't a chimney left in this area. And these are testaments of that earthquake from 1886 and the damage it did to the City Hall, which was a brick building. It wasn't made to sway in an earthquake, and it cracked it so bad that I'm amazed that front stood. The steps that you see right here, originally you could not get into the little room but under the steps. You can now. They opened those up and made storage areas out of them some time ago. And I went in there one day with somebody who knew a lot about building and construction and stuff, and he started pointing out to me the damage that an earthquake had done. Then remember, this is an area that people don't go in, or used to not go in much. And it was unbelievable. And he said, he pointed out bricks, said if that brick right there had gone, it would have caused a chain reaction and this whole portico would have fallen down. The mayor's office, which is right in that front right, or used to be in the right downstairs front office, it would have taken out that whole corner of the building. But what they did is they brought in these rods, iron rods, And in order to hold the building together, they ran them across the floor in the upstairs courtroom. And it went from front to back and side to side. And then on the outside, these bolts were put in place and screwed in and tightened. And together, they would form a tight, what would you call it? A mechanism basically just to keep the walls from falling down. And down in Charleston, you'll see them everywhere, because that's what they were doing down there too. The buildings that had been damaged but not so bad that they couldn't save, you'll see earthquake rods in them. However, sometimes you'll see them and they'll have decorative caps on them rather than just a rectangular cap like that. There might be some kind of decorative cap to it. So those are testaments of the 1886 earthquake. Now, as I said, they ran that on the top of the floor. See, this building was built to be fireproof. So they didn't have a space in there where the wooden joists were where they could run it between them. If there was a vacant spot, they filled it with brick or rubble or whatever, something that would not burn. It's probably why it's still there today. And so they had to go across the floor. Well, they couldn't leave it like that with these rods going across. So they went in there and they raised the floor in the courtroom just enough to cover the earthquake rods. So when you walk in, when you go up the front steps and you go in the front door on the second floor, you know how at first you're down ground level and then you have to step up? That's why. It was not designed that way. It's because it's earthquake rods. Prior to 1886, it was the same level as that front porch. You just walk right in, all on the same level. And that's also why the floors upstairs are not the original floors, because they were down lower. When we were doing restoration 20 years ago, we found some evidence that the floors in the courtroom also might have been brick instead of wood. We know they were brick downstairs in the hallway that goes from front to back, but they might have been that way upstairs in the courtroom also. Now, we're going to try something. This is a link to a YouTube channel. It will open up to a page where a man by the name of Noah Cooper had been recorded sometime probably in the early 1900s. He was from Horry County, had moved to Mullins County, and then he moved up to like Ohio, I believe. But he was born and raised here. And he experienced this earthquake of 1886. And he was recorded on what they called a wire recording. It was basically, I don't know the technology behind it, but those early recordings, instead of on a disc or a tape, it was actually a wire they could record things on. I'd never heard of it or seen it until this. But a man in Mullins, South Carolina, ended up with this one of, he collected that kind of stuff, this recording from Noah Cooper talking about the night that the earthquake hit Horry County in 1886. And it's fascinating to hear. Now, if we can get it running, the thing is, it's also fascinating to hear his voice and to hear how those of us from Horry County used to talk. And it surprised me because it reminded me of the way when I was growing up the people in Charleston used to talk. But we had lost that around here by then, and we could tell between somebody from Horry County and somebody from Charleston. But you can hear that in Noah Cooper's voice. And that's fascinating because I'm thinking, did everybody around here talk like that then. But it's kind of hard to understand. So we're going to see if that link will work. Let me read something just so you'll get this out of it. He talks about being awakened in the night of the thing. Then he says, another great roar like thunder underground and a movement of the earth made us dumb with fear. We ran out on the ground. The oaks in the yard were swaying back and forth. Although there was no wind. There was no wind. I feared that the earth would open up and swallow us. We huddled together till the great roar subsided. Amid the several aftershocks that night, Nora could hear some distant neighbors crying and shouting and praying. He decided to go to the terrified neighbors and try to calm them down. About 1 mile down the road, he found a friend on his knees near the front gate of his house where he lived. He was praying very loud, and sweat was pouring from his face. His mother-in-law was sitting in the middle of the yard in an old rocking chair, praying aloud but without fear. She was saying, "Oh, Mr. Cooper, the world is coming to an end. God is disgusted with the wickedness of the people. I am not afraid. I am ready to go, and I expect the world to be ended before daylight. I'm going home. Glory to God. Hallelujah." And then, of course, the world did not end, but the tremors continued for about 7 weeks. They kept getting those. Now, Mr. Cooper was teaching school, so he understood what was going on. So he could talk to these people and kind of calm them down. News reached Horry County that Charleston had been destroyed by a tidal wave. And for about a week, that's what they thought. Churches throughout Horry and other nearby counties were never more crowded than on the following Sunday. Some preachers suggested that the grape vineyards be cut down to stop winemaking and wine drinking. Apparently, Horry County had really nice grapevines that had been here for like hundreds of years, and they were using it to make grape. We don't hear of that much, but you can find in the old records a lot of mention about homemade grape wine. Well, the preachers convinced everybody that they needed to cut their grapevines down because God was not happy. And so that's what happened to all our grapevines, at least the ones that we've been used to make wine out of. All in all, people found religion, if only for a brief period, after the great earthquake of 1886. I also have read that apparently Charleston was cut off from the rest of the world. So while we thought Charleston had been wiped out by our tidal wave, the people in Charleston thought everybody else was gone, including, this is one story, that the peninsula of Florida had broken off and sunk into the sea. So not the panhandle, but the part that goes down towards Miami, all that was gone, they thought. And it took a while for communication to reach these remote areas to let people know what had really happened. But I just think that's fascinating to hear him tell that story. But if you go online, you'll find it. You can understand it better, probably. Okay, these are just some odds and all pictures about the building, showing some details. There was a project a few years ago to restore some of the hand railings that were on it. You can see, I think, in that one right there, the one on the right. No, it's the other one on the other side. It's that one. Some of the pickets are missing. And we had an expert, Richard Johnson, who was expert wrought iron guy. He came in, did a lot of research on it, and very carefully restored those to where it looked like they were new again. We don't know what happened to them, why they were missing. But on that side, at the bottom where the railing kind of ends and curves around, only one or two supports were left holding that part up. And it had been that as long as anybody could remember. There it goes. That's how I always remember it. But he worked on it. And by the way, let me mention this. See this little X right here? That is carved into the stone. We believe that that goes back to the construction of the building, and they were using that as some kind of elevation mark for the city or the village. But anyway, Richard reconstructed the stone, hand forged the iron rails, and look how good it looks. Where he ready for the iron to go back, and there, put it back. Excellent job. You couldn't ask for any better than that. And there it goes today. Now look at this. This is something he discovered while they're working on it. Bullet marks. See these little, they actually yellow, they might appear white to you. Do you see those little dots going on up the steps? Most of them are right here. And he noticed those in the steps and got down and examined them in detail and had this picture and put them on here so we could see where the bullet marks were. But it appeared that if you were to have been on a horse in the middle of the street, that would have been about the angle of the level that most of those bullet marks are. We don't know that that's what happened or how long they had been there, but there's no record of it, and it's just fascinating to think what happened here. All these bullet marks, and also this is the same side where those things were missing. Could it happen when the Union troops came into town at the end of the war? We know they ransacked the courthouse, tore up records. A lot of our early county records were destroyed. There are notes in them that say that. They didn't burn it down because you couldn't burn it down. It was all brick pretty much. Thank goodness for Robert Mills. But we'll never probably know unless we find some record somewhere long since forgotten. But I think that's fascinating that he was able to find all those. And the last part is about the horse trough, town clock, and the Revolutionary War cannon. These are all things associated with this courthouse that you might not be aware of. This old fountain came from the Charleston Exposition. Walter, was that about 1880s? Do you know when it was? It was somewhere in the late 1800s. It was a big exposition down in Charleston. And this was a fountain in one of the displays. I think it was where out towards where the Citadel is now. Hampton, is there Hampton Park out there? Maybe. Anyway, the city of Conway, when they were closing all that down and getting rid of it, the city of Conway bought that, brought it in Conway, and put it in front of the City Hall, old courthouse, and used it as a watering trough for horses. Now later on it was moved over to the side. There's a artesian well that was right on this side right here, and they piped it and had the horse trough sitting right on the edge of the road right here. So when you're in town on your horse, you could pull over here, go right up to it, whether you're on a wagon or riding a horse, and the horses could drink right out of the fountain on that corner. And people, apparently the pipe from this artesian well let it flow down into the fountain. So people would take cups, and you could put a cup under there and drink nice, clean, fresh artesian water while your horse was drinking out of the fountain down there. Eventually, it was moved. I guess when cars came around, they didn't need it anymore. And it was moved to the other side of the building in what is now the Robert Mills Park, where it's a fountain again. So it's going full circle, and back is a fountain. Let me see. I don't know what's going on there. Anyway. Okay. the other thing is the town clock. Don't know whether y'all know about that town clock, so I'm going to tell you. It came as a result of a festival that used to take place in Conway called Farmers' Day. Farmers' Day was instituted in 1938 by Mayor Carl Busby to further good relations between the Conway business community and the farmers of Horry County. Farmer mayors and councilmen were named to govern the town for a day. Their mock court raised funds for the town clock. So they would pick one of the farmers, you're the mayor for the day. They would pick others to be the town council. The clock tower was designed by W.H. Winburn, who was a well-known cabinet maker in Conway. Among the skilled crew who helped build it over a 3-month period were William Taft Skipper and his brothers James Holloway Skipper and Collie Skipper, and Norman E. Skipper. Newsom, Harrelson, and Roy Martin. The tower was constructed of local blackjack cypress purchased from the Conway Lumber Company. So that's how they got the town clock there. It was left over from the Farmers' Day. The local cabinet maker designed it. Those other guys helped build it. And the money came from, on Farmers' Day, if you were not dressed as a farmer, like you were out working in the fields, you got fined. So if the bank president was going into his bank dressed in a suit, he was fined X number of dollars, and if he didn't pay it, he was taken off to jail. Of course, they would pay, and all that money would go towards building the clock, so that when the farmers came to town the next year or any other time, they would know what time it was by the clock. So that's kind of just an interesting little story there. And when they were building the foundation for this clock, there's a concrete foundation. They had to get that really good, real level for the workings of the clock. But right over here in this far corner, they found something that they didn't expect to find. It was a cannon barrel. People first thought it was just some kind of pipe, but they realized, no, this is a cannon barrel. When excavation for the base of the clock was done, a 3-foot cannon barrel was discovered. It is thought to be a surveyor's mark, probably established when the city was surveyed in 1802 by William Hemingway. His map is preserved in the City Hall. Earlier surveys had been done in 1732 and 1783, but these maps are not long to survive. However, the Hemingway map was done based on those other maps, on the 1732 map. The cannon barrel was put back at the base of the clock, and I'm glad they did, because had they kept it out and not treated it, it would have corroded and it would probably be in really bad shape. But they went ahead and put it right back where it was, because it was a surveyor's mark. And to this day, if you walked on this corner, go to this front corner of the clock here, and you will see the end of the barrel of that cannon sticking up. Richard Johnson, again, the same guy who helped us on the railings, and is really good at all this stuff. He loves history and Revolutionary War history. He took measurements off the barrel and everything that's sticking up out of the ground, and has verified it that it does meet the size, the dimensions of barrels from the Revolutionary War era period. And one day I was reading something about General Francis Marion when coming through Horry County during the Revolutionary War, and it said something interesting. It said that he came through village of Conway Borough, or Kingston at that time, went on down what's 378 today, and at some point when they got way down on 378, they left the road and headed towards the Little Petey River, and they were going to cross it there. But they hadn't gone far off the road, and they realized they couldn't be hauling. They had 2 cannons they were carrying behind them, 2 small cannons. And they took both of those cannons and dumped them and hid them off of the main road out in the woods before they got to Little Petey River, because they couldn't carry them across that. And I probably dumped them to come back and get them later. But I can't help but wonder, because this is about a 3-foot cannon, which would have been just about right size for them to be hauling around behind horses all over the place. Makes you wonder if in 1802, when Hemingway was needing something to put in there to mark that corner, that cannon had been recovered at some point from Marion's when he dumped those 2. And I just wonder if that might be Francis Marion's cannon. Can't prove it, but everything fits right. All right. I think that's pretty much it. There it goes. There's the barrel sticking out. And we talked about digging it up and having that cast and putting a replica in the ground, and then restoring the cannon and putting it somewhere around City Hall. But when we talked to the experts about doing that, they said don't do anything until you have the money to restore it raised and have it all lined up for the person that's going to do it. Because once you take it out of the ground, it's going to start deteriorating if you don't keep it in the right conditions. And so that's why we left it there. One day, we'll get the money and have the people lined up, experts who know how to take care of that, and we'll take it out and have us a Revolutionary War cannon downtown, maybe, like the museum has now in the front circle right here. Do y'all know that there's a Revolutionary War cannon out here? Okay. Donated by the Cutts family. It was off of one of the Bucks ships that were here. And the ground floor, I'm going back to this picture again. Looking through an old newspaper account, we found a mention that they were going to be closing in this hallway. This hallway used to be open, and it was a brick floor, and it ran from front to back. And as you walk down it, the offices would have exterior doors that would open up into that tunnel. It isn't like it is now, where all the offices open up into an enclosed hallway. That was an open area. Well, apparently it would stay cool in there on hot summer nights, because there was a notice in the newspaper in the 1800s asking people to try to keep the cows from that area, but they were going to be erecting a fence around the old courthouse. What was happening was, at night in the summer, the cows just kind of wandered around, and they had discovered that there was a nice cool spot there, and next morning they would find cattle in that tunnel had gone in there to stay cool during the night. So to stop that, they put and in that book that I told you that I have, sure enough, it's in there where they're talking about a wooden fence around the courthouse building. They describe it in details, and it was to be painted red, a red wood fence. I just think it'd be so cool to put it back like it used to be, but I don't know whether that will ever happen. So anytime you get in there, think about those cattle in the hot summer nights. There's the hallway we're talking about. And what happened, remember I told you they were brick floors? The floor was about a foot or foot and a half below this wooden floor. And they were brick. And what you would do, there would be a step in front of each of these entrances. So you'd step up, and then you'd step up again and go into the office. If you go in there and look at the doorways, these are the old original doors from 1825. You'll notice that it looks really funny at the bottom of those doors. It looks like somebody cut the bottom of the door off. Well, that's exactly what they did do. When they came in here later on and put a door at the front and in the back of the hallway, they raised that floor level with the office floors But these doors back then, I think, opened outward. And anyway, they had to end up cutting off the bottom of the doors to make it fit right. And that's still there. You can see it when you go in there. And this is how it looks today going through. And that's where all the cattle would have been. These are just some pictures. We'll just go through these. This shows some of the details that you may or may not have seen. Old caps above these corner caps up there. When you compare it with modern day construction, it's so much nicer back then. You know, they had big boards, ledges were deep. Like, let's look at this ledge here. You know, your hand would fit in there easily. Now, these days, they don't have any kind of ledge when they build new construction like that. That's a picture of the side, front. Oh, and by the way, you'll see people refer to this oak tree out here as a hanging oak. No one was ever hung on that oak tree. That is a myth and a misconception. It was not done. As I said, they had an interior hanging room for legal hangings, by the way, in there. And when they did have sentences that had to be carried out that they wanted outside, they built scaffolding out in what used to be the old muster field, which is several streets over, where the troops used to parade. But they would build scaffolding for that. This oak tree out here was never used. There are pictures of this thing when it was not so big. It wouldn't hold a hanging, for one thing. The other thing is, there was a store within 5 feet of it. You would not hang somebody in front of somebody's business store. Hanging was a dirty thing. But I tell people that, and I have to argue with some people to this day. They still think, oh, it was a hanging tree. No, it wasn't. Matter of fact, I told the city to take it off the tour map. And they didn't want to take it off because everybody thought it was wonderful, or interesting. I said, but it's not true. Fake news. Anyway, so here we are with this classic building that we can be very proud of its history. It's served Horry County well. It served the city of Conway well. It was designed by a nationally prominent architect, and it's the most intact building for a courthouse that he designed in Horry County. Any questions? Well, I hope you enjoyed it or learned a little bit. Basically, this talk was just to ramble on, to hear about details that you probably would never hear anywhere else, and show pictures that you might not have time to see. Anytime you're going by that building, you're probably in a hurry, rushing by. Next time, go a little bit slower, walk around it. If you want to, ask them if you can go up in the courtroom and look around. It has a very interesting balcony in there with the stairs that go up to it. The stairs are only about 2 feet, the passageway 2 feet wide. I squeeze in to go up into it. It's just very interesting in there to look around. Anything else? All right, well, thank you all for coming and have a good day.